All right, so anyone else find themselves lost in those rabbit holes of online success stories?
Yeah, me too. It's just, I don't know, fascinating. But then you stumble across a Reddit thread buried deep in our Pakistan titled, Why Are Goras Ahead? And you just know you have to dive in.
Oh, absolutely. It's like a siren call for anyone who's ever pondered those global success stories,
Is
right?
it? And this one, let me tell you, it is a loaded question, no doubt. But wow, did it trigger a whirlwind of opinions and perspectives?
People were fired up.
Exactly. And that's precisely what we're delving into today. The core of that debate, all the different angles.
It's amazing how one simple question can unlock so much, you know. You get those cultural assumptions bubbling up, economic realities laid bare,
Yeah.
even personal experiences that have shaped how people see the world.
It's like everyone brought their own unique lens to this discussion. And one of the first things that popped out, at least for me, was this whole Desi bosses versus Gora bosses thing.
Right. Like that was a major theme that emerged. It got real fast. We're talking users sharing stories about working under Desi bosses, the long hours, the doing the work of three people kind of thing, and then boom, fired. Just like that.
And the way people were describing it, it wasn't even a you're fired in a boardroom, more like a don't come back tomorrow kind of deal.
Brutal. And it wasn't just a one-off comment either. This seemed to resonate with a whole bunch of people.
Definitely struck a nerve.
And then there was this other user talking about pulling all-nighters, the whole 9 yards. Crazy overtime, never seeing a single extra rupee for it. All under this, I don't know, expectation of loyalty. Have you ever encountered that?
Oh, I think we've all had that boss, right? Where it's like, you should just be grateful to be here.
The worst.
But it does make you think about the different work cultures at play, the expectations that come with them. Like you see this term Seth culture thrown around, which often gets painted with this demanding, sometimes exploitative brush.
Right, like Seth culture, is that more of a stereotype or a reality based on people's experiences?
That's the thing, right? It's complex. To really understand it, you got to dig into the historical context. South Asian business practices, especially in the past, often prioritized family ties, loyalty above things like, I don't know, structured work hours or benefits.
So it's like this blurring of lines between dedication and exploitation.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder how much of this is rooted in cultural norms versus, like you said, individual management styles.
Right. So is it the culture or is it just a bad boss?
It's the age-old question, isn't it?
This makes my head spin.
And it circles back to how we define success, right? Is it individual achievement? Or is it fulfilling family and societal obligations? That plays out so differently across cultures.
That's a really good point. And it actually segues perfectly into, like, the next massive wave that crashed over this thread, the whole individualism versus collectivism debate.
The battle of the cultures.
Right. It was like East versus West playing out on a Reddit thread. Like, one commenter described Western societies as this blank canvas.
Yeah.
Like, you have the freedom to chase your passions no matter how out there they might seem.
I like that. The blank canvas.
But then they contrasted it with this feeling of being trapped, almost like in a cage, especially within more traditional, community-oriented cultures.
That's such a powerful image, right? The blank canvas versus the cage. It gets at that fundamental tension, individual freedom versus the support system of a close-knit community. And honestly, neither one is inherently better. They each have their pros and cons. It's all a trade-off.
It's true. Like, imagine living in a bustling city, right? Endless possibilities, but maybe you feel lost in the crowd sometimes.
Exactly. Versus living in a small village where everybody knows your name, but maybe you're craving a bit of anonymity,
Or at least a different coffee shop.
Right. It's all about what you prioritize. And it gets even more, nuanced when you factor in the economic realities. Like, yeah, individualism might offer more freedom career-wise, but it often comes with less of a safety net.
It's sink or swim time.
Pretty much.
Whereas in collectivist cultures, yeah, you might have fewer options, but you've got that built-in support of family, of your community. It's like, what, security for freedom? Or freedom for security?
Yeah, bingo. It's a trade-off, and it's all over this thread. And it gets especially interesting when you look at the discussions about multi-generational households. I mean, that's huge in many cultures, but it's especially prominent in some South Asian communities.
Well, for sure. I mean, the thread really dug into this whole thing about kids living with their parents well into adulthood.
Yeah.
And how that impacts, everything. From money to, like, just figuring out who you are as a person.
It's fascinating how much emphasis is placed on family and that kind of interdependence in certain cultures.
Right. Like, on the one hand, less pressure to move out, less student loan debt maybe,
Yeah.
built-in support system. But then, on the other hand, are you putting off certain life experiences or feeling held back? It's a lot to unpack.
It really is. It all ties back to that fundamental question, though, doesn't it? What does it truly mean to be ahead? Is it individual financial independence or a more community-based measure of success? It's not a simple answer.
It's like we could spend hours just unpacking those family dynamics. But there's another layer to this whole thing that we can't really ignore.
Religion, right?
Exactly, religion. It always seems to be right there in the mix, especially when we're talking about global disparities and, different cultures approaching success in different ways.
And this Reddit thread definitely did not shy away from that. People had a lot to say.
Oh, for sure. It got pretty real. There were a lot of comments suggesting that, well, maybe the West's success is kind of tied to its secularism.
Right, like that whole idea of focusing on the afterlife means you're not as worried about worldly achievements.
Which, you can see where they're coming from, but it's also a pretty loaded statement.
Yeah, and it definitely oversimplifies things. Because when you look at periods like the Islamic Golden Age, it totally challenges that whole narrative.
Right. Like for centuries, Muslim scholars and scientists were making these groundbreaking discoveries. Math, astronomy, medicine, you name it.
They were pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. So it's not like faith and scientific progress are inherently at odds. There are plenty of examples of them going hand in hand.
Exactly. Like these vibrant centers of learning were popping up all over. Libraries filled with incredible knowledge and this real spirit of inquiry.
And we can't forget about modern-day examples, like China and Japan.
Good point.
They've achieved some crazy technological and economic power while still having these strong cultural and spiritual traditions.
So it's not really about the religion itself, right? It's more like how faith interacts with other factors, like what government, social structures, even historical events.
Exactly. Speaking of history.
Oh, here we go. The colonialism talk.
Yeah, it's impossible to have a conversation about global disparities without talking about colonialism's impact. And the users in this thread did not hold back.
No, they did not. Tons of comments pointing out the lasting effects of colonialism. Resource exploitation, disrupted economies, power dynamics, the whole 9 yards.
Right, and it's essential to acknowledge that legacy. It's about recognizing that a lot of countries are dealing with these systemic disadvantages as a direct result of their colonial pasts.
Totally.
But, and this is crucial, it doesn't mean a country is doomed because of its history.
Okay, so where do we draw that line? Between, like, using the past as an excuse versus understanding its real impact.
Right, because plenty of nations that were also colonized have managed to overcome those obstacles and achieve incredible things.
So true. So what sets those success stories apart?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Is it strong leadership, investing in education, fostering entrepreneurship?
It's got to be a combo, right? Like all of the above.
Probably. But it's a question that people within those societies have to grapple with too. It's easy to get caught up blaming external factors, but what about individual responsibility? What role does individual effort play?
That whole, you can't control the wind, but you can adjust your sails kind of thing.
Exactly. You might not be able to change the past, but you can influence the future,
Right.
both personally and collectively.
It's about taking control where you can, right? And speaking of taking control, there was this one comment. It was brutal. I almost choked on my chai.
Oh, let's hear it. What did they say?
Okay, so this user, with zero hesitation, just comes out and says, we're Hawaii donkeys.
Wow. Straight to the point. I'll give him that.
Right. Not exactly diplomatic, but you got to appreciate the honesty.
A little dose of tough love never hurt anyone.
Exactly. And to be fair, this user wasn't just complaining. They actually went on to talk about needing a serious mindset shift, like moving away from this whole work our hooves off mentality.
There you go. It's not just about working hard, it's about working smart. And this is actually where the whole conversation took a turn, became more constructive. A lot of users started emphasizing education, specifically access to the kind of education that equips people to compete globally.
Yes. Investing in people, that's huge. Nurturing talent, giving them the tools to succeed. But then, and I think this is crucial, it's about creating an environment where those skilled people actually want to stick around, contribute locally.
100%. That's the uphill battle, right? That brain drain. You can educate people all you want, but if there are no opportunities, no incentive to stay, they're going to take their talents elsewhere.
It's like planting a garden, right? And then being shocked when all the flowers wither because you forgot to water them.
Yeah.
You have to cultivate that environment if you want to see growth. And speaking of growth, there was this really interesting shift towards the end of the thread, almost like a glimmer of hope.
Oh, tell me more.
So one user, they start talking about this future where Pakistanis are dominating specific fields globally. And not because of some external advantage or anything, but because of their talent, their work ethic, their innovation.
Now that is a future I want to live in.
Right. Imagine Pakistani doctors renowned all over the world. Pakistani engineers at the forefront of renewable energy.
It's about changing the narrative, flipping the script from why are we behind to what if we were leading the way?
Exactly. It's about owning your potential, both on an individual level and as a community. Setting those big, audacious goals and then figuring out the steps to get there. Focusing on solutions instead of getting bogged down by the problems.
Love that. And it's a question we can all ask ourselves, no matter where we come from or what our background is. What are those ingredients, those conditions that allow any group to truly thrive?
Right. And more importantly, what can we do, each of us, to cultivate those conditions in our own lives, in our communities, in the world around us?
Now you're talking.
This whole deep dive, this whole conversation, it started with one simple question. Why are Goras ahead? But as we dug deeper, as we always do, it became clear that there's no simple answer. It's a tapestry of history, of culture, of personal choices, of those systemic forces that are way bigger than any one of us.
Totally. It's complex.
But that's the beauty of it, right? It challenges us to think critically, to examine our own biases, and to approach these big global questions with a little more nuance, a little more empathy, and hopefully to walk away with more questions than we had when we started.